So, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me. This is our second lecture, of course, in TEFL. This is, as you know, part of a lecture series that I am giving live on my YouTube channel. So, of course, always stay tuned on the Facebook page or even here on YouTube to be informed about when the next lectures are going to be, inshallah. So, our second lecture, of course, is entitled Key Terms and Concepts in TEFL. We are going to look at key terms, at concepts in TEFL, also at acronyms. This is, of course, part of the introduction to the field of TEFL, of course. The key terms and acronyms that we are going to see today in this lecture are the most important ones in the field of TEFL. So this is in fact a non-exhaustive list and it's not complete, but these are the most important ones that we'll see together. You will find that there are really many other terms and acronyms in the field of TEFL. So I have selected the most important ones, and there are others, of course, that you can find on the internet. And so we are going to start first with looking at acronyms. I'm going to start by looking at acronyms in TEFL. And of course, acronyms. Now we start with acronyms. An acronym is the abbreviation formed from the initial letters of words and pronounced as a word. For example, when you say the United States, you take the first letter of the United and you take the first letter of States and it becomes the US. US is the acronym for the United States, of course. So there are really many different acronyms in TEFL, and there are very famous ones that we are going to look at together. I want to start with this first one that you might have heard about, which is called CEFR. This is, you might have heard of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, or CEFR for short. It's a system that's used to evaluate and describe language proficiency. It's been, of course, adopted. It's been adopted by lots of European countries and is used all over the world as a reference for language education and testing. Now, the CEFR is divided into 6 levels, of course: A1, A2, B1, B1, C2, C1, and C2. Now, each of these levels represents a different level of proficiency, ranging from beginner that you find in A1 to proficient that you find in C2. These levels are based on a person's ability to do certain language tasks, like understanding spoken or written language, speaking and writing in different contexts, and using language for social and professional purposes. Now, the CEFR is used for all sorts of things, like evaluating language proficiency for academic or professional purposes. It is used also for immigration and citizenship applications, and also for personal development. It's also used as a reference for language education programs, and also for language exams, and also for teacher training. So the CEFR, as I said, is one important concept or one important acronym that you have in TEFL that you have to know about, of course. Now, the next one that I want to talk about is a bit related to the CEFR, which is called the Celta. Now, you might have heard of Celta. It is a qualification for English language teachers. It is, of course, the acronym for Certificate in English Language Teaching to Adults. Now, this qualification for English language teachers is offered by Cambridge Assessment English, which is part of the University of Cambridge. It's really respected and recognized by employers and educational institutions all over the world. Now, Celta is meant for people who want to teach English as a second or foreign language. We'll come back, of course, to the distinction between second and foreign language in this lesson or lecture today or live session. But this distinction between second and foreign language is one which is very important for us and which we are going to come back to again and again. So Celta is meant for people who want to teach English as a second or foreign language, of course, but don't have much or any teaching experience. So it covers practical teaching techniques, theories of language learning, and of course language analysis. You can take the course in a classroom, but you can also take it online. Now, to get a Celta certificate, you have to complete a course that lasts generally for 4 to 5 weeks. So it's about a month usually, but sometimes it can go up to 5 weeks, and it includes at least 120 hours of input, supervised teaching practice, and written assignments. Now, at the end, you have to do a teaching practice assessment and a written exam. So if you have a Celta qualification, you have lots of job opportunities teaching English all over the world. Now, employers see it as some kind of a sign that you are a good teacher. It can also be some kind of a stepping stone to further study in language teaching and education. So this is about then the Celta. I want to go next to another term or another acronym there, which is EAP, or you might have heard about this as English for academic purposes. Now, of course, it's basically a way for non-native speakers of English to improve their language skills for university level studies. EAP courses usually focus on teaching the language skills and, of course, academic vocabulary that students need to succeed in their studies. This includes stuff like now reading and understanding academic texts and writing research papers and essays. It can also include writing papers and giving presentations, and of course participating in class discussion inside the classroom, of course, usually at the university. Now, EAP courses may also cover study skills, which are very important if you are going into a university abroad that uses English as the medium for teaching and learning and for evaluation and assessment. So you might get study skills like how to take notes and how to prepare for exams and how to do research. All of that can be included in an EAP program. Now, EAP programs, in fact, are often offered by language schools, and they are usually taken by students who have been accepted to university program, but they need nonetheless to improve their English language skills before starting their studies. So EAP courses can be full-time, or sometimes, so when I say full-time, you have to take the full course all the time, morning and afternoon, and perhaps even evening, before you can start your course in, for example, physics or English or mathematics or any other course or any other diploma or specialization that you have chosen to study at university. Or it can be part-time. When we say part-time, we simply mean that they can be in the evening, for example, when you finish your studies, studying, for example, mathematics or physics or whatever else, you can then go and study EAP, your EAP course, to enhance your English language skills in academic language. And they can last from a few weeks to several months, depending, of course, on the student's needs and goals. Now, EAP is really important for non-native speakers of English who want to go to university, because it helps them to get ready for the academic demands of university study. So that's for EAP. The next one that we want to look at is a very important acronym in the field of TEFL and TESOL, which is ESL, which stands for English as a Second Language. Now, it's a term used to describe people who are learning English as an additional language, usually because it's not their first language. Now, we are going to come back to this important distinction between ESL and EFL, English as a second language and English as a foreign language, for example. Now, in Algeria, for example, English is a foreign language. It's not a second language. French is the second language. When we say it is the second language, we simply mean that it is used outside of the classroom. Whereas foreign language means that it is not used outside the classroom, like English, for example, is totally a foreign language in Algeria. And so it is basically used inside the classroom. Whereas French in Algeria is a second language because you see it used outside the classroom, not only by the people, but also by the media, for example, or newspapers, or on TV, by the government sometimes, and in the professional life, that is in companies, French is used as a second language, whereas English is a foreign language because it is used basically inside the classroom, although by now it is more and more used outside the classroom, but not really in everyday life, but more into the professional and academic life. So that's what we mean by English as a second language. For example, in the United States, if you are a Spanish, let's say someone coming from Latin America, and your first language is Spanish, then English is your second language, right? So English is the first language is in the United States, but if you are an immigrant from Algeria, then English becomes your second language, and that's what we mean by English as a second language. The next one then is EFL, which is English as a foreign language. Now, this is different from ESL because, as I said, EFL students predominantly learn English as a foreign language within their own native country. Like in Algeria, you learn English as a foreign language, where English is not typically spoken in the country. So the language is mainly, as I said earlier, taught and learned inside the classroom. That's the case of English, of course, for example, in Algeria. Now, another term that I want to introduce there is EL or ELL, which stands for English learner, EL, or English language learner. No. EL and ELL are terms used to describe students who are learning, of course, who are learning English. And so these terms are often used in educational settings in the United States, but also outside of the United States, to refer to students who are still developing their English language skills and need some kind of an additional support in order to be successful in their studies. Now, EL and ELL students may come from a variety of linguistic and cultural backgrounds and may have different levels of proficiency in English, of course. So that's our acronym. The next one that we want to look at is ELF, which stands for English as a lingua franca. Now, ELF is all about using English as a common language for communication between people who speak different first languages. It's not about one group of people trying to learn English as a second language, but rather about using English as a way to communicate with each other, even though everyone speaks different languages. So lingua franca, for example, the lingua franca in the old times was Latin, for example, because this was the language which was used for commerce and for making transactions between different people who spoke different languages. So, for example, if you are from France or Algeria and I am from Japan, we want to talk to each other. So we might use English as a common language, even though it's not our first language. That's what we call ELF, or English as a lingua franca. Now, ELF is a really important concept because it in a way recognizes that English has become a global language and is used for communication between people from all sorts of different linguistic and cultural backgrounds. It's not just about learning English as a second language, but about using it in a way to connect with others. So that's for our acronym there. Now, ELT is very simple. I'm not going to take much time there. ELT is English language teaching. Okay, ELT is English language teaching. I don't want to spend too much time there. It's self-evident. Now, ESOL is English to speakers of other languages. Now, ESOL, ESOL, English to speakers of other languages, is used to describe elementary and secondary English language programs. It is also used to I don't know if the sound is clear or not. Is it clear? Yeah? No problem there? So far, so good? So, yeah, I think the sound is clear. So far, so good. So ESOL, or English to speakers of other languages, is used to describe elementary and secondary English language programs. It is also used to talk about classes within adult basic education programs. So it is a bit more general than EFL or ESL. So ESL is very specific. EFL is a bit more, is broader than ESL. Then ESOL, English to speakers of other languages, is broader than ESL and EFL. Then we have ESOL. And we are going to talk a bit later on about TESOL as well, of course. So the next acronym that I want to show you today is ESP. Probably you know about ESP. You've had, if you are English language students, you've had this at the university, which is English for specific purposes. So ESP is all about teaching English as a second or foreign language for specific purposes or specific contexts. It's a type of language education that focuses on teaching language skills and knowledge that are specific to a particular field or profession. So Examples of that is that you have now many programs and many textbooks about teaching English for aviation, teaching English for health, teaching English for technology, teaching English for economics, for nursing, etc. All of that is what we call, of course, ESP. Now, the ESP program might be designed, of course, to teach, for example, English to engineers or doctors or business people, and consequently would focus on teaching language and terminology specific to those fields. So ESP programs might also be designed to teach English for specific purposes, like English for academic study or English for tourism, for example. So that's then about ESP that you probably might have heard about. Now, IELTS, which is the International English Language Testing System, the IELTS is an English language proficiency test that has become very popular by now. It is used to assess the language ability and proficiency of people who want to study or work or live in an English language speaking country. It is recognized by universities, employers, and immigration authorities in many countries around the world, of course. And it has become some kind of a benchmark of English language ability. So the IELTS test consists, in fact, of four parts. It consists of testing listening, then the reading, then the writing, then the speaking. Each part is designed to test different language skills, and the test is graded on a scale from 0 to 9, with 9, of course, being the highest level of proficiency. Now, there are two versions of the IELTS, as you might have heard. There is the academic test, which is designed for people who want to study at the university level. And then there is the IELTS general training test, which is designed for people who want to work or live in an English-speaking country. Now, IELTS is really important test for people who want to study or work or live in an English-speaking country. And so over the years, it has attracted thousands and by now millions of people who want to take the IELTS test to test their English and to live in a country. So that's for this particular acronym. Let's go to the next one. So in the next one is L1. Now, L1 means first or native language or mother tongue. Now, L1 or the first language is the language that a person learns from birth or during the early years of life and uses most fluently. It is often the language that is spoken at home, in the community, and is the language that a person feels most comfortable and proficient in. So usually this is referred to as the mother tongue. Now, of course, L1 is an important concept in language education and in linguistics, as it can have a significant impact on a person's language learning and language use. For example, a person L1 may influence the way they learn a second language and may also affect their ability to use the second language in different contexts. So in language education, L1 is often taken into consideration when teaching a second language, as it can provide foundation for learning the new language, and it can be some sort of a resource for understanding and using the new language. Now, understanding a person's L1 can be very helpful, in fact, for identifying and addressing any potential, like some kind of challenges or difficulties they may have in learning a second language, of course. Now, next, then, after L1 is L2. Now, L2 is simply second or foreign language. We have talked about L2. Now, L2 is a general word or a general acronym for second language or foreign language, but it can also be L3, L4, L5, and L6. That is, it doesn't really matter the number of languages that you speak. They are all generally referred to as L2 in the sense that you are speaking a third or fourth language, or generally a foreign language which is not your native language, of course. So L2 is also very important concept and word and acronym and term in of course in TEFL that you probably have to pay attention to and that you probably need to learn about again and again. Now, the next one is SLA. Now, SLA is second language acquisition, and I've put this one right next to L1 and L2 because we need to talk about SLA. There are many theories of SLA. How do SLA as a theory, or the theories of SLA, simply look at how do people acquire a second language. Now, there are many theories that are concerned, of course, with how do people acquire a first language, but there have been, since the 1980s, of course, many theories that have concerned themselves with how do we acquire a second language. Now, SLA then is the process of learning a second language after a person has already learned their first language or their L1. It is then SLA is the process. It is the second language acquisition process. It is a field of study that simply, again, to repeat myself, investigates how people learn the second language and the factors that can affect their ability to learn it. SLA research does one thing, which is it really looks at how people's first language influences their second language learning, for example. It also can look at how different language teaching methods and approaches can impact second language acquisition, and would look therefore at the most effective and efficient ways in which you can teach and learn a second language. It can also, a field of study in study and research in SLA is how social and cultural factors can affect the way people learn a second language. Now, SLA then is an important field of study because it helps us understand how people learn a second language and what factors can impact their ability to do so. This understanding can be useful for language teachers, for policymakers, for educators, for researchers, so that it can lead to effective ways in developing language teaching approaches and materials, and a way to help individuals who are learning a second language be successful in learning a second language. Nordin Hamid is asking, is SLA different from second language learning? Yeah, in a way it is. So here you are making a very important distinction that we'll come back to in a subsequent lecture, which is second language acquisition and second language learning. And second language acquisition, to put it simply, because I want to come back to this very important distinction a bit later on in my other lectures with you, which is that second language acquisition is an unconscious process, whereas second language learning or foreign language learning is a conscious process. To put it simply again, second language acquisition can happen outside the classroom. That is, you are not aware that you are learning the language. And second language learning usually refers to the process of learning a language inside the classroom. And so you are conscious that you are learning a language. This is a very simplistic, of course, distinction between learning and acquisition. And I'm going to come back to this distinction when I have a full lecture about crashing, the theories, second language acquisition theories by crashing. TEFL is teaching English as a foreign language. I don't want to, of course, expand much on this because we have already talked about it. So TESOL stands for Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages. Previously, I have introduced ESOL, which is English to Speakers of Other Languages. So it's simply the fact that you are teaching English to speakers of other languages, that is, not speakers of Spanish, for example, or Arabic, but speakers of other languages. You might have a classroom in which the speakers of your classroom, the students might, each one of them speak a different language than the other. So some might speak like Chinese, and others Arabic, and others Spanish, and others French, and so they are speakers, all of them, of other languages. And so it's a bit more, as I said earlier, broader than ESL and EFL. Now, TESOL also refers to the international association. The international association, TESOL International Association, which I think you are familiar with if you are a bit familiar with my journey to the United States, where I attended, as you have watched from my different videos, I attended the annual TESOL International Convention in Pittsburgh. So it can also refer to that international association. My next acronym is, now we get into the key terms now. Now, we have looked at the acronyms. Now we go to the key terms. Now, my first key term is academic language. And academic language is the language that is used in schools and colleges and universities for academic purposes. I've talked a little bit about this before. EAP, it's a kind of language that you might use when you are writing a paper or giving a presentation for a class. Now, academic language is different from the kind of language we use in everyday conversations because it's often more complex and formal. It might include bigger words or like longer sentences, and it might be more technical and abstract. So this is because, of course, academic language is used to convey knowledge and to express ideas and to communicate research and to communicate findings of that research, and which can be more complicated than, of course, everyday language. And so a very important concern of TEFL is not only to teach everyday language for communication, for everyday purposes, but also to teach academic language as some kind of a field or a category within ESP, because it is academic language is studying English or learning English for specific purposes, which is academic purposes, of course. So that's academic language. Then we move to the next one, which is authentic language. Now, authentic language is language that is used in real life situations rather than language which is created or modified for teaching or learning purposes. Now, authentic language is the language that you might hear or use in your everyday life, like conversation with friends, that you might use, that you might see or hear at work or in the media. Now, authentic language, in other words, is different from made up or what we call artificial language, which is the kind of language you might use in a lesson, in a language lesson or a language textbook, which you created by the teacher or created by the textbook designer or the textbook writer, who create this language, and it is not natural, or it is not authentic language. Whereas authentic language is the one which is taken directly from the native speakers or from the an authentic social event, for example, a real one. And so in fact, authentic language is the language that is actually used by native speakers in their everyday lives. And it can include a wide range of vocabulary, grammar, and expressions. Now, of course, why is this important for our purpose in TEFL? Because using authentic language in language learning can be very helpful because it gives learners a chance to practice using the language in real life context, and it helps them to get exposed to natural, real language that they might hear from native speakers, and so that develops their, of course, comprehension and would develop their language skills more naturally. Whereas the what we call fabricated language, which is the opposite of authentic language, can be a bit unnatural because it is created just by humans. Of course, more importantly, and you might have a question about this in the PhD entrance examination, it can also be helpful in developing understanding of the culture and the customs of the language that they are learning, which is not something that you can get with the fabricated language or the language which is made up or created for the purposes of the lessons or the purposes of the textbook. Next is bilingual education. Now, bilingual, you have two languages, which is bilingual education is generally used is a type of education that involves teaching academic subjects in two languages. So it is the kind of education that you find in the United States. If you are an immigrant, for example, again from Latin America, you might be taught mathematics not only in English but also in Spanish. So it's a way of educating students that recognizes that many students speak a language other than English at home and helps them develop their skills in both languages. And so bilingual education, of course, is important in places where English is spoken as a second language, not so much as a foreign language. Community of practice. Now, a community of practice is a group of people who share a common interest or profession and who come together to learn from each other. And they come to learn from each other and share their common knowledge and their experiences. It's a way for people to connect and learn from each other in order to improve their skills and knowledge in a particular field of or area. Now, this is very important. A community of practice, for example, is when we have a group of students of the first year. This group of the students of the first year, they are a community of practice because they have shared interests, shared experiences, etc., etc. Yes. Next. Next is comprehensible input. Comprehensible input. Again, I'll come back to this when I will talk more about this when I talk about Krashen, because he is the one who is famous for coming up with this particular term, comprehensible input. So comprehensible input is language that is clear and easy to understand. It is clear and easy to understand for someone who is learning a new language. It is a kind of language that is at the level that is just for the learners, so they can understand what is being said or written and can learn from it. Now, comprehensible input is really important for language learning because it helps learners make sense of language they are learning and helps them develop their language skills. When the most important thing in comprehensible input is that the language that you are listening to or reading must be comprehensible at around 80% or 90%. That is, only 20 or 15 or 10% of it is incomprehensible. So for it to be comprehensible, it has to be understood at 80%, which is up to the level of that particular student who is reading or listening. It is very important, of course, to give your learners comprehensible input, that is language which is up to their level, language that they can understand. So it is important because it helps learners make sense of the language they are learning and helps them develop their language skills. When learners are presented with language that is too difficult or too easy for them, it can be hard for them to learn and make progress. So comprehensible input, again, is not too easy at the same time. So as I said earlier, you must always leave like 10% or 20% or 15% of the input a bit incomprehensible, so that they learn new words, for example, or learn new expressions, or learn new ways of saying the language. So to make the language comprehensible, it's important to use clear, simple language and to present new vocabulary in a way that is easy for learners to understand, of course. Next is what we call content-based ESL or EFL. Content-based EFL or ESL is a type of language education that focuses on teaching language skills through the study of academic or real-life content. It is a way of teaching English that combines language learning with the study of other subjects, such as science or math or social studies. So when you have content-based education, this is what most of English language students in Algerian universities had. For example, when they had literature, when they had linguistics, civilization, what else? ESP, all of these are content-based modules. Skill-based modules or skill-based education is listening, writing, reading, and speaking. Content-based is when you give content and through that content you learn the language in some sort of an indirect, of course, some sort of an indirect way. Why is content-based ESL or EFL important? Because it can really be helpful for language learners, because it can allow them to learn English in a way that is meaningful and relevant to their interests and to their goals. Now, when you are interested, I don't know, in mathematics or in science, and you are learning about mathematics or science or physics or literature or linguistics, when you are learning about that in English, you are more immersed into the content than into the way. But unconsciously, we come back to acquisition here, you are at the same time like learning the language, which is a way of saying that you are hitting two birds with one stone. So the next term or concept that I want to talk about is cultural diversity. Now, cultural diversity refers to the variety of cultures and traditions, languages, and ways of life that exist within a society or community. Now, why is that important in English language program or in a second language program or an EFL program? It is important because you have to take into account the different backgrounds of your learners so that you don't like offend them. And so your content, that is the way in which you are presenting your content for the language, must be diverse as to address all the different ways and the different backgrounds and customs of your learners. And this is a way of showing respect to other cultures. The next term is discourse. Now, discourse is language in use. Discourse is language in use. It refers to the way that language is used in different social contexts and for different purposes. Now, discourse has become very important in the English language teaching and English language learning, and in SLA and in English language learning, because it tries to include things like conversation and writing and other forms of education in their context. This is very important, of course, concept in teaching English. Feedback is information that is given to someone about their performance. Of course, their performance, you give feedback. This is given by the teacher. The teacher is the one who gives feedback. Sometimes feedback is given by peers, that is student to student, but generally feedback is given by the teacher. It is given by the teacher to the teacher for the performance of the student, or for the behavior, or for the work, with, of course, the goal of the feedback, because you are given feedback. So the goal is literally to help them improve. That's the only purpose of the feedback, is to help people improve and learn at the same time. And it can be positive, but it also can be negative, or ideally it can be a mix of the two. But it cannot be something that harmful, because if you are too negative and you are too harmful to the student, you might of course hinder or have a problem with their, of course, confidence. So you don't want to do that. Now, in TFL, feedback is, of course, the response by the teacher or the peer to students' output. That is, when you say something or you write something, and with, of course, the purpose of helping that student with language learning. Now, common feedback types are clarification requests, repetition, what we call recast, reformulation. It can be implicit correction, or it can be explicit correction at the same time. We can talk about elicitation as well, or self-correction. All of that is part of feedback, and you can, of course, look up all of these different terms of or kinds of feedback. Formative assessment is an assessment which is a type of assessment that is used to monitor and track a person's learning or progress over time. So it is formative, or we also call it continuous assessment. Now, formative assessment is different from summative assessment that we are going to look at right after this one. So what is it all about? It's really all about gathering information about how someone is doing over time, continuously. For example, at the university, this is during the semester. In an English language program, this is during the period, for example, during the 30 hours that they are learning the language in one level. So formative assessment, of course, can have different forms. It can be in the form of a quiz, it can be in form of a test, it can be in form of a project, in the form of observations, and it can be formal or informal. And it can be done by teachers, or it can be done by students, or by peers. All of these different people, different shareholders, of course, can do what we call formative or continuous assessment. Now, the opposite of formative assessment is what we call summative assessment. And now, for summative assessment at the university, this is what you get at the end of the course. That is, for example, right now when they finish, you are on vacation if you are a student, and so now when you finish your vacations, you are going to have a final exam, end of course exam. That's what we call summative assessment. It comes at the end. It's the opposite of formative assessment. Usually it takes the form of a test or an exam, which is very formal. You sit down and you pass the exam or the test. The next term I wanna refer to is language form. Now, language form, of course, simply refers to the specific words, sounds, and structures that are used to create meaning in language. The opposite of language form is language function. Now, language form is the how, but language form is also the purpose. So the function refers to the different ways in which language is used to achieve specific purposes or specific goals in communication. It's all about how language is used to convey a meaning and interact with others. And so again, it is some sort of a sub-term to the term that we have seen before, which is discourse. So discourse, as we said, is language in use. Then language function are all of those ways in which we try to convey meaning through form. So it can include things like asking for information, giving instructions, expressing emotions, or making requests. It can also include things like politeness, tone, and other conventions that are used in language. Now, of course, it is important in language function, is very important in teaching English as a foreign language or a second language, because it is the one that you use for communication, to interact with others in different contexts. So that's why we use, or we teach generally, language function that has become very important, especially in the approach that we talked about in the previous lecture, which is the communicative approach, of course. Next in the list is language input. Now, language input refers to the language that is encountered or received by a learner when they are learning a new language. I talked a little bit about this. I'm not going to spend too much time there. which is simply when I talked about comprehensible input. So language input can come in many different forms, such as spoken language, written language, or visual language. All of that is what we call input, of course. Next is language proficiency. I talked a little bit about language proficiency when I talked at the very beginning about the Common European Framework for Languages. So it refers to simply a person's ability to use language effectively. And so that's what we mean by that. Language transfer. Language transfer refers to the way a person's knowledge and skills is in one language, that is Arabic, for example, can influence their ability to learn a language and use language in another language. It's all about how knowledge and skills that someone has in one language can be transferred to another language. Now, it can be positive, but it also can be negative. So when it is negative, we generally say that we have a case of what we call interference. That is, the first language, the native language, Arabic for example, is interfering with the second or foreign language in the way you are learning this second or foreign language. So it can be positive or it can be negative. Lesson objectives. Now these include these include content and learning strategy. Now lesson objectives are specific goals or outcomes that a teacher or educator wants to achieve during a lesson or course. We will come back to this, of course, in subsequent lectures and lessons together. Multilingualism is the use of more than one language. In Algeria, we have a multilingual setting and context because usually many people speak different languages, not just two languages or one language, but they are multilingual. And our schools, for example, are multilingual. So a multilingual community consists of a group with speakers of more than one language. But some members of the community might speak only one language, of course. So output is the opposite of input. So output is the oral or written language generated by the student. It's important for us. The next term is register, which is a variety of language that is associated with specific social situations. For example, academic language or legal language, or for example, you could talk about baby talk. I come to an important term in TEFL, which is scaffolding. Now, scaffolding is support given to assist students in learning new information and performing tasks. So it is the help which is provided by the teacher in order to help students succeed and be successful in achieving or in doing the task that the teacher has assigned them. Often it is provided by the teacher through, for example, demonstration, modeling, verbal prompts, example questioning, feedback, adapted text, graphic, organizers, language frames or pictures, and among other techniques, of course. So that's what we mean by scaffolding, which are all of the different ways and techniques used by the teacher to help make the language comprehensible, which is something that we have talked about earlier. Now, social language is a register. It's a register of English language. Now, I talked before about academic language. Social language is a bit the opposite of social language because it is a conversational language. The basic language proficiency which we use in everyday situations. The target language, of course, you might know about, and so we finish with this one. The target language, of course, is the language that the student is learning, which is also called second language or L2, or the new language or the foreign language as well. So all of these are different ways to, and those who know translation know about the source language and the target language, of course. Hey, that was it for today. Thank you very much for being with me in this live session. This is, of course, this was our second lecture. We are going to have a third lecture in which we are going to talk about principles of TEFL. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you, inshallah, in the next one. Hey, peace.